Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hotdish podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
So we've been asking all of our guests what their favorite hot dish is. Ashley, we haven't talked about what yours is. What's your favorite hot dish?
I would have to say mac and cheese. I know that that's one that was brought up in the last few weeks. And I'm lactose intolerant, so it's really funny that I would say mac and cheese. But I think that a lot of hot dishes tend to have like cheese in them, so it's kind of unavoidable. But the way I make mac and cheese is like it is like a hot dish. It's a casserole for those people who don't know what hot dish is. You know, it's real thick. It's got like a panko breading on top, Parmesan cheese. I mean, it's when you cut into it, it's not like, you know, you making it on the stove or something. It's like a real dish. It's really good. I love.
Does it hold its shape when you cut it up?
It actually holds its shape. Yeah. So I cut it into like squares and then like dish it up because it stays in shape. Yeah.
You and Will have to have a mac and cheese contest to see whose is better, because that was his favorite one, I think.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if it was Will. When he said that, I was like, oh, I do love mac and cheese. So, Merlin, what about you? What's your favorite hot dish?
That's a good question. I know you just brought up that you don't really like green bean casserole. I'm not sure if I guess that counts as a hot dish. I freaking love that stuff. Like, I will eat gallons of it around Thanksgiving, but I feel like it's a very, I don't know, like I'm only going to eat it once a year. Like, I'm not going to make it if it's not Thanksgiving. So
only Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I just don't like green beans.
Well, it's too bad.
Beans are so good.
I think, though, possibly my favorite thing that I would actually count as a real like casserole hot dish is a kugel, actually, which I'd never had until I started dating my now wife, who was Jewish, and at some point one of her relatives passed away, and so everybody gathered together. And I don't know if you guys know this, but when somebody dies in the Jewish faith, you sit Shiva for a few days, and then like people bring food, and basically all of the food is kugel. Like, everybody brings you a kugel. So you get these huge trays of like this sweet noodly casserole with either breadcrumbs or cornflakes on top, depending on which sort of version you prefer. So I got to try lots of kugel, and I was like, actually, it's pretty good.
It is good.
I've never tried it. That'll be something I'd have to add to the list.
It's tasty. How about you, Liz?
I also like green bean casserole, but only will eat it at Thanksgiving. Other than that, I guess something that's more traditionally a hot dish is that my grandma used to make something called chicken yummy. It's basically chicken, cheese, and like bread. That's it. No vegetables.
That totally.
And that was really good.
Well, it reminds me of Adam, who's like, oh, we just take, veggies and like Velveeta cheese and mix it all together. Just like people in the Midwest create their own hot dishes, I feel like. Just put it in a 13x9 pan and throw it in the oven.
I will say chicken yummy. Yeah.
Chicken yummy.
I will say last night we were talking about hot dishes, and the most unique one, I've never had it, but Tom's mom has made it, was like White Castle hot dish. So if you have like a crave case left over from like the night before, you like mash the hamburgers up into a hot dish.
Wow.
I'm sorry, that sounds disgusting.
But she hasn't made it in a long time. I've never had it. I think this was like, a 20-year ago thing.
That is intense. That's like, talk about reusing everything. I feel like that's so Midwestern, right? Nothing goes to waste. You find a repurpose for everything.
Yeah.
That's so gross.
Merlin's dying.
Merlin's done. I think we've lost Merlin for this
I'm
one.
sorry. It's just real nasty. Like, White Castle's bad enough fresh.
I like White Castle.
I've never had White Castle.
What? Oh,
Yeah.
Something else we have to go get then, Ashley, when you visit.
Someday. Maybe that'll prevent me from visiting. I don't know. I've heard mixed reviews about White Castle.
You should try it once. You don't ever have to try it again, but you should try it once.
That's awesome.
Okay, our topic for today We're going to talk about like how to prep to speak at a conference or submit sessions for conferences. I know we have a few deadlines coming up with Summit and Dynamics Con. Ashley, what are your thoughts on how to kind of know what's going on the conference schedule and when things are due and things like that?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting topic because I think back to the first time that I spoke at a conference, which is Summit 2016. And I reached out to Tony Stein, who was the program director at the time. And I just said, hey, I want to speak. Like, what do I need to do? And so he kind of helped me and guided me along and gave me some feedback and things like that. But I know not everybody has a connection like that, right? Where they know somebody they can reach out. Sometimes you're just alone. And so I would say that you always want to be aware of like what's not being talked about. And I say that in a way because like if somebody's not talking about it, then there's a need for it. I think that people like me and Liz and Merlin, I don't know if you fall into this, but you always forget about like the people, like you always want to talk about the new and exciting things like, oh, let's talk about the Power Platform and how that can solve problems. But you forget that there are some people that are still just making their way into this space and they don't know the basics. They need to know, how do you function as a CRM admin? What are some things that you need to know as a first-time consultant? So I think that sometimes that can be a big gap in conference sessions. And so I think that the first thing I would do is do some research on what is out there already and what's being over talked about and what's being under talked about.
I think it's a good point. I know when I'm trying to pick a topic to present on, sometimes I'll look at the previous year's content schedule to see if there were gaps or get ideas from that. I think it's a good point. I think it's also a good point that you don't have to be like cutting edge or something that's never been discussed before. I think anyone can come up with some topic to present on, like no matter what your skill set or background or experience level.
I think it's definitely true. Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't want to cut you off, Marilyn. So I think that that's true because I always think of like local user group meetings too, right? Which I don't want to say are like a mini conference because it's like 20 people in a room, but it really is, right? You're trying to get people in the room speaking, and there's an audience for them. And I always tell end users, like, don't be afraid to stand up and share your story. And those are the ones that I think are missing a lot from conferences. People are always intrigued to know what somebody else is doing in Dynamics, whether they can relate it to their own business, they could actually repurpose it. They just want to know, what are you doing? Like, what is cool and exciting in your world? Did you create a dashboard that solved this problem? People just like to hear that story. And, you know, I say dashboards because obviously everyone wants to go the Power BI route, but sometimes you've just done something really cool in your system and people want to hear that story. So I think that make it, like you said, Liz, it doesn't have to be cutting edge. It just has to be cutting edge for you.
Right.
Right.
And way too many consultants are presenting. Yeah, go ahead, Merlin.
I was just going to say, like, sort of following on that, I think it's the same, like, you could have solved a problem in a way that you thought was cool and interesting with either new tech or some older tech or barely any tech at all. But the fact that you solved the problem might be really interesting to somebody else. And so submit a session on it. And at least in, like, if we think about some of the conferences like Dynamics Con, like the public who's going to attend is actually voting on the sessions that they want to see. So I feel like that's a great way to get some feedback on, oh, you submitted a session and people are voting for it, or you can see how many votes other people's sessions are getting. And so you can sort of help, like, for the next time around, that'll help you.
Yeah.
I submitted a session to Wax Dynamics Con. Nobody voted for it. I was like, okay, well, that was a terrible session idea. I'll try something different later.
Well, and sometimes things just aren't relevant at a point in time or for the audience or the conference. Like, just because it doesn't get picked for one conference doesn't mean that you can't submit that to something else or next time. Or maybe it was just like your title or description that wasn't catchy enough or articulate enough or creative enough or whatever, where it just wasn't, I don't know, something that caught someone's eye.
Thank you for making me feel better.
Well, I think that that's a good point, though, Liz, is we like to make Merlin feel bad for his session not getting picked, apparently, is that, you know, I think that making sure that your description is clear on what you're going to speak about. I've been on the Summit Programming Committee for the last 5 years, I think. Trying to do the math in my head real quick. And that's the first thing that people always say is like, hey, this description needs more detail. What direction are they going to go in the conversation? So I think that the more detailed, I know the descriptions need to be short, but at the end of your description, say, this is what people will walk away with. This is what they're going to learn. This is what I'm going to hand off to them. That can make like a huge change in somebody being interested in your session or not.
I also think knowing like the length of the session that you're submitting it for. So like if it's a 30-minute session, don't submit enough like a description that would needs like 4 hours worth of time, or vice versa. Like if it's an hour and 90-minute session, don't submit something that's like 15 minutes worth of content. So like tailoring like what you're going to cover to be like applicable to the length, I think is important.
I'm curious, since Ashley, you've got the all the experience on the picking side, how important or relevant or useful is it to come up with clever titles versus just a straightforward descriptive title?
For those of you who are listening to this on the podcast and not the video, I rolled my eyes at Merlin when he said that.
I think Merlin's asking because he still needs to submit his summit sessions.
So I'll say, honestly, I don't read the titles unless I don't know what the description is talking about. I know that sounds really weird, but the meat and potatoes of that's me personally, right? Now, other people that are on these committees that I've been working with for years, they could look at it and say, oh, that subject isn't even, or the topic isn't even grabbing my attention, so I'm not going to read the description. But for me, I always read the description because that's going to tell me what I'm going to walk away with, or what the people in the session will walk away with. From there, it's up to I would say the person who submits it to submit a title that's going to be eye-catchy enough and like the program guide. Because as long as the content is good, it's such a catch-22, because you'd want to say like, oh, as long as you have good content, it doesn't matter what your title is. But of course, like if your title just is like really boring, it's not going to catch any attention. But also if you make it too fluffy, we've found that out too. When I worked at Dynamic Communities, we would make a lot of like our training titles fluffy, and then I think people didn't take it as seriously.
Or it could be just unclear what it's about because it's so creative.
Exactly. And so we had to backtrack a little bit on those. So
that makes sense.
I think having a good balance of like tying in words, like doing a play on words, but still talking, using what you're talking about is good. So
Ashley, I wanted to go back to your comment about like speaking at a local user group, because I think if you've never spoken at a big conference before, like the big ones might be intimidating, and like trying to plan a session at a local user group meeting instead might be like a first step or first thing that people could do if you're nervous or uncomfortable about, submitting something to Summit or a larger one.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point, but also in this virtual world, I don't know how many local chapters have gone back in person. So if you were ever considering or thinking about speaking, this is kind of like the perfect time to kind of get your feet wet and just like to, tap in just a little bit to see, if you like it. Because even if you wanted to speak at a local user group conference, you don't have to, or local user group session, you don't have to do your own. You could now in this virtual world, you could reach out to somebody else in the country and say, hey, I've never spoken before, but I don't want to do this in front of the peers that I know. Sometimes people are uncomfortable speaking in front of people that they know, so they'd rather reach out and talk to other people. So, but it can be, or people are more comfortable with people they know. So I just think that it's a really cool opportunity and time to get into that. But yeah, don't overlook user group meetings. It's a great way you can do the same sessions for both conferences and meetings. I think they're awesome. And they happen more often.
That brings up a good point too, is presenting virtually. Like, do you guys have any thoughts on like, is there a difference between presenting in person versus virtually?
Yes.
Which do you prefer? Like, which do you think is easier? Are they just different?
Honestly, I think presenting in person is easier. And I guess, so presenting virtually is less sort of scary or intimidating because you're obviously not actually standing in front of a room full of people. But you're also like, I feel like at least for me, part of the reason to do a presentation is to get some feedback from the audience. And when you're presenting virtually, like you're just talking at your computer, like you don't know if anybody's actually paying any attention. Is this interesting? Is it not interesting? Like you tell a joke, did anyone laugh? I don't know, right? Like
No one laughs at your jokes.
I appreciate that no one laughs at my jokes, but sometimes, Liz, some people do. And so I prefer to be in person because then I can see, at the very least, I can see somebody sitting in the audience who's like, oh, this is a stupid joke. And they like shake their head a little bit, like kind of roll their eyes. And I'm like, yes, I got one. That's all I need.
Well, I agree with you, Merlin, because you can kind of feed off the audience. And that's what I love
Mhm.
doing in person is like, depending on how they're reacting to you, if they're answering, I like to ask a lot of questions while I present and kind of make it more engaging. I also tell a lot of jokes, but I think people actually do laugh at mine, Merlin. But, and you can kind of tell if people enjoy the content or if you need to like redirect and say, okay, like they're clearly not catching on to this or it's not engaging to them. Let me shift a little bit. Whereas when you do things virtually, you're kind of stuck with just what you prepared to present and you can't really shift if necessary. Now, is one easier or harder? I don't know I just think they're so different. I would say, I don't want to say I prep less for online, but in person, you're always like, well, they could ask this, or they could go here, they could go here, so you're kind of like thinking of like, okay, I need to think of all these different offshoots of where my presentation could go, where on.
I think I prep more for virtual.
Okay. Interesting.
Because it's like you don't have any engagement or feedback or questions. So it's like there's nothing to like fill up the extra time or kind of like make it more interesting. Like it is just you talking to like the wall, basically.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see both ways, but I mean, I think I prepare a lot more for in person because I'm just terrified of like where the conversation will go.
Huh.
Because you're a planner.
I am a planner, Marilyn. Yeah, that is true. You've seen my notes for sessions.
It's true, as will surprise no one who knows me. I just show up and it's fine. Everything will be great.
Classic Marilyn.
I know. How about you, Liz? Do you have strong opinions on virtual or in person?
I prefer in person, but I do see I think if you were new to presenting that it might be more stressful to present to a larger in-person audience. Also, I think it's harder to have notes. If you do really need your notes, I think it's easier to present virtually and just have them up on a monitor. And it's not like you're practicing this eye contact thing with the audience. So I would say for a new presenter, finding a virtual user group session might be a good place to start.
I would say,
but both take practice.
Yeah, I would say in person is harder for me just because I get nervous. Even after all this time, I still get the nerves and stuff. And then virtually, I don't feel any of that. I'm just confident and so yeah, in person just terrifies me for sure. But I mean, it's definitely something I'm working on. It was a challenge I gave myself. So
I don't want to scare people off. I want to be clear that most times these sessions at these conferences, you're talking to maybe 10 or 15 people in a lot of these rooms. You're not in the conference hall in front of thousands of people.
You're not the keynote.
You're in a little room in all those little banquet carve out rooms at the hotel space. And you've got 4 rows of chairs and there's 10 people in there. And at least 2 of them are just sitting there working on their laptop or their phone.
That is a good point, Marilyn, because that's a me problem. I've always hated public speaking, which is why 6 years ago, I was like, all right, I'm going to challenge myself and I'm going to start speaking at conferences. So that is definitely a me thing. Not everybody has that terrified.
I think it's a common point of anxiety. I think having some anxiety around public speaking is a pretty normal thing though.
I also want to say one of the things that I've noticed in this group, and obviously I've only ever really worked in dynamics, a little bit of marketing. I went to one marketing conference, but everyone in this community is so supportive. Everybody wants you to succeed. So it's not like you're going to walk up to the front of the room in person, be nervous, and then people are going to berate you or say
boo you.
Yeah, exactly. Or throw out things oh, that was terrible. I wouldn't have done that. Everybody is cheering for you. They truly want you to be successful because they want to learn. And so I've always found that incredible about this community because everyone wants to see you succeed.
Not only that, but the audience can help improve your session. If you can tell maybe someone doesn't have enough content or there's just not a lot of engagement, the audience can ask questions or share stories that really make the overall session like more interesting and kind of like get the conversation flowing. So the audience can help you too.
Yep. See, that's another reason why I really like in person, because that will happen a lot. You get like one person asks a question. You're like, I don't actually know because I haven't had that experience. And then on the other side of the room, somebody else is like, actually, I just did that last week, and here's what I did. And then those two have a conversation with each other, and then somebody else jumps in, and you're just like standing there at the front of the room, like, all right, yeah, sweet, I'm learning stuff too.
You're like, I put together a great session.
Yeah, it's a great session. Look
You
at these guys talking to each
facilitated
other.
this conversation. Yeah.
Right.
And that's normal. And like, that's awesome when it
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
So when you guys are thinking about submitting sessions, like how do you put together your description? I'm just curious on that. Like, how do you even put together all the thoughts that you have on a session into that, I don't know, 180 words or whatever it's supposed to be?
Well, I make someone else write mine for me.
Well, same.
I've
So
never
Lauren,
actually,
go ahead.
yeah.
And then just periodically remind that person that he's supposed to do that before the deadline arrives. I feel like my process, at least, is I try to distill it down to a few like high level bullet points, and then I write a narrative around those bullets. And realistically, I'm probably actually relying on the skills that I built in high school, writing the 5-paragraph essay for one of the AP tests. Like that got drilled into my brain, like a 5-paragraph essay, you're gonna have 3 things that you're gonna say. So, all right, my session's gonna have 3 things that need to be said. There'll be an intro and an outro and 3 paragraphs, right? So like, you just sort of shrink that down and be like, all right, these are my 3 bullets. And now I'm just going to create a little narrative. It's like, so we're going to talk about this, then we're going to go into that, and we're going to follow up with that. And at the end, you will have learned all these great, wonderful things. And then try to come up with a clever title, but not too clever.
Depends on the conference, I think, on the title.
I think that's true too.
I think it's also helpful to like just run it past someone else, like proofreading anything, like just find a peer or reach out, like just have someone else read through it and give you feedback before you submit it.
That's true.
That won't ever hurt.
Right. Read this. Do you know what I'm going to talk about?
Right.
One of the things that I wanted to get involved in the community when I started speaking. And one of the reasons I started speaking instead of writing a blog, which I also consider, is because I hate how I write. But I also want people to not be scared of that too. So if they're just like, I'm not a good writer, I don't know I can't put this together. Like following what Marilyn just said would have helped me tremendously years ago when I wrote my own descriptions. Now I let Marilyn do them. So you know what I mean? So it's like, I think that just having a conversation with somebody, I know Marilyn takes notes while we're just talking about the session and then puts it together. So I think maybe just talking it out sometimes too helps. So you can get all your thoughts out, have somebody record them, and then put it together from there.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody just needs me as their secretary. It's totally fine.
You do a great job at it though, Marilyn. Like, why would we give you up?
Fair enough. My services are available for hire.
I think that the other thing that, like, with all these conferences that are popping up, especially in this virtual world, how do you guys stay on top of like the deadlines and due dates, and if they get postponed or pushed up, like, how do you keep a track of it all? How would you recommend for somebody to keep track of it?
That's what I outsource.
Yeah, I'm like, Ashley, you do
to
that. So how do you keep track of that? And then tell us.
So
I outsource this to the
my
type A personalities.
I'll answer my own question. I follow everyone on Twitter. I know that sounds, but I'm really active on Twitter. I'm on Twitter every day, multiple times a day. I know Twitter is not for everybody, but if you want to stay up to date in this space and know what's going on, not only from MVPs, but from conferences, companies that support this, like Dynamic Communities, Dynamics Con, even Microsoft themselves. Honestly, they post everything on Twitter. And then I kind of just keep like a backlog of dates for us of like, okay, we have to submit by this day, or and then I also try to see who will let you get involved in maybe helping plan the conferences as well. Like Dynamic Communities allows people to get involved with Summit. I believe there are like Scottish Summit. I think there were people who were, who got involved to help plan that. So obviously then you'd know about the dates if you were involved in the conference. But yeah, Twitter is the place where I do it all.
Yeah, and then I guess you kind of keep track of like what's coming up or what's changing, but like
Mhm.
internally with the three of us, we have like a planner board where we kind of have a log of like what we need to plan for, like what's upcoming. But you definitely keep an eye on Twitter for us.
Well, yeah, and it's helpful, like if you, and I know I say this a lot, but obviously I'm over the past few years, I've gotten more connected, but if you don't know anybody in the community, go to one of the conference pages and start following some of the people that follow that conference. That's a great way to kind of expand your network, and then they'll get involved with other things and post about them. That's how I found out about the Power Platform 24-hour conference. Was just because somebody that I knew was a part of that planning committee. So, and they retweeted it. So yeah, it's pretty cool what you can find out there.
So Ashley, what are the upcoming deadlines that people should know about?
Yeah, good question. And I should have written them down. I just know that DynamicsCon is early July and Dynamics Community Summit is end of July. I should have written down the exact dates. But I'm not the
9th. July 9 was DynamicsCon.
DynamicsCon, yeah. And then Summit just moved theirs. It was before July 4th. And now they've moved it to July 31st, I believe, to give people more time.
Nice.
Those are the only two that I'm aware of at the moment. But spring and fall is the biggest time for conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem, I guess maybe this is because I now have you keeping track of when there are conferences and which conferences there are, or maybe it's because of everything going virtual, but I feel like the number of conferences has like expanded dramatically beyond at least what I was aware of.
Yeah, I think so. I think virtual makes it, I don't want to say easier, but it does, right? Like for my last user group meeting, we're virtual. We had somebody from the UK come in and speak. We never could have done that if we were still in person. So I think that the virtual environment, it kind of forced us all to think creatively and like, how can we still stay connected? But I do know that a lot of like Summit is going to be a hybrid in person. And then there's going to offer some things online. And then DynamicsCon now is even considering an in-person when their entire platform were the online conference. And so now they're considering doing something in person later this winter. So it's I find it fascinating kind of how all these online ones have popped up, but now some of them are going in person too.
Yeah.
It's because we're all starved for interpersonal contact and connection.
Are you though? Because like I went to a baseball game over the weekend and it was like me and my friend who were there just kept saying like, it's so weird to be doing something normal, like, so I think that when we get back into those in-person conferences, it's almost going to be like, wow, things are almost normal. They feel almost normal.
Yeah, it'll be weird, but I think it'll be better.
Maybe people will still respect the social distancing rule. I do like the 6 feet thing. I like people not all up in my space.
Maybe. You can hold out hope.
Any final thoughts?
I don't think I do.
Yeah, my only final thought is like, don't be scared to like, just try, just throw something out there. Even if your session doesn't get picked, you're going to learn something from that experience, or reach out to somebody, who has spoken before, somebody that, there's always a couple of speakers at every conference where you're like, I have to make sure I go to their session because it's always good. Ask them, ask them for advice. All of these people that speak are obviously speaking because they want to give back to the community. So anybody would be willing to offer their advice or opinion to you, whether that be the three of us, which I know I can speak on behalf of, but like even the rest of the community of speakers, which I feel like I can speak on behalf of. I don't think there's anybody that would say, no, I'm too busy to help you. Everybody wants to help you succeed. So yeah, if you're thinking about it, reach out.
Yeah, find a mentor if you're nervous or you just don't even know where to start. Just reach out, and the community is more than happy to help.
Absolutely.
Yep. Good advice.
Okay, well, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hotdish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.